Hi there, and welcome to my creating project presentation. My name is Ian Thompson, and I'm going to talk about what I created for the creating project in EDU-709. So, when I first started to think about the creating project, I wanted to talk about a problem that I faced in my classes from day to day. And to give you an idea about what my teaching looks like, I teach in a program called Computer Security and Investigations, where we use a lot of industry-specific software, a lot of very complicated, very expensive computer operating system, Cisco routers, all this kind of very expensive computer equipment to teach our students how to operate them effectively. And what we found this leads to is basically one lab that's worth about $500,000. And as such, you have to secure that lab appropriately. It has to be physically secured. And as more and more programs and more students come into the computer world, it's a very growing trend, we found that it creates a very high demand on one or two specific rooms that are really the only rooms that are equipped with this technology. So that makes it very difficult to evaluate for two reasons. One, as the instructor, I have to physically visit each and every student in my classroom during some point during the lab period to see what they've done and see how they've accomplished the task I've set them. The second thing that makes it very difficult is that the student basically has one shot to complete their lab. They have one scheduled 3-hour block in the lab, or two, or however many is appropriate for their course, but if they don't do the lab in that one time period, they basically miss out. And they can try and sneak back into the lab later at night and then drag me down to evaluate their lab later, or they can try and bribe another teacher to let them into the lab during their class time. But basically, if they don't make the lab in that one particular instance, it becomes very difficult for them. And that's not good, because there are a number of legitimate reasons why my students might not be able to make it to class. They may be sick that day. They may have technical problems that they need to work through. The computer that they are using may be totally infested with viruses, and they need to take the time to correct that. So it creates a very difficult situation for the students. So how do I want to solve this problem? Well, I want to use a product called VMware View to create virtual machines for my students to complete the labs in instead. So a virtual machine is a software instance of an operating system. And if you're not familiar with the concept of virtualization, you don't worry, I'm going to explain that in my next couple of slides very thoroughly. But basically what it should do in the end is allow my students to complete the lab using the very specific software and the very specific equipment in the room, but do it from anywhere they wish. And for this assignment specifically, I've selected the Microsoft lab assignments. The Cisco lab assignments would also be another good candidate. And those two are very good because they are very scripted. So when the student enrolls in this particular course, what they'll do is they'll go out and buy a textbook that's published by the vendor, published by Microsoft Press or Cisco Press, and in that textbook, they will have a very specific set of instructions to follow. And they will do that, and the professor will evaluate based on how well they followed those instructions. And it might seem a little counter-pedagogical, but the experience for the student is to be able to go through and have the experience of completing that lab. The actual how-to is not as important as the experience of doing it. So we want the students to go through and actually do it. So the rough idea here is that the professor will prepare a virtual template. The students will access it through the VMware View software. The professor will then evaluate the students' work. And then finally, I want to see if we can throw a software product called Panopto into the mix, which allows the student to record their session and create notes on their recording. And that could be used for more complicated labs where the teacher needs to watch the how-to. Okay, so don't worry about all these technical things that I have on this slide. I'm going to get right into explaining them right now. And the first one that we have to concern ourselves with is, what is virtualization? And I think the best way to understand virtualization is to remember the last time you went to a computer store and you talked to a salesperson and they told you something along the lines of, you will never use all of the power that you have in this computer. And that's very, very true. 100% accurate. On an average given day, a user probably uses between 40 and 60% of the available computing power that's available to them on their desktop or laptop computer, which leaves the remaining percentage of the computer basically just unused. It's there if you need it, but it's not regularly used in your day-to-day activities. And that's because hardware manufacturers like Intel have gotten a lot faster at producing higher quality processors and RAM and components, where vendors like Microsoft and Apple haven't quite kept up to that on the software side. So what we're ending up with is computers that are far more powerful than what we need. Virtualization attempts to leverage these leftover resources by allowing you to run a second version of the operating system concurrently. So that's to say, at the same time, you can run two different versions of Windows. And that's illustrated in this picture here, if you can follow my mouse, where we have a Windows XP desktop and a virtual Windows 2000 desktop. The interesting part about VMware and virtualization in general, VMware is the largest manufacturer of virtualization products, but the interesting thing about VMware is that this virtual PC that I'm pointing out here has no idea that it's a virtual PC. It will behave exactly the same as if I were installing Windows 2000 on a regular physical hardware box. And that can be very useful in the computer industry when we start talking about testing, if I want to see how something's going to behave, or maybe I have an Apple computer and I sometimes need to use Windows. I can create a virtual machine of Windows and run it at the same time as I'm running my Mac OS. So taking this idea one step further, though, this gets really, really important when we start looking at the data center, where we have thousands and thousands of servers. And virtualization is really useful in that context because it means that we can run 5 or 6 servers on one physical piece of hardware. So if I have a supercomputer, a really expensive server class computer, I can run 5 different versions of Windows on that computer at exactly the same time and save myself buying 5 physical devices. So virtualization is a really, really cool way of efficiently using your computer resources, which is great, but you're probably wondering, how do I apply this to my classroom problem? And that's where VMware View comes in. What VMware View allows us to do is to create a virtual machine that we can access over the internet. So in this instance, this user here is accessing this on their own desktop. They've installed this software called VMware Workstation, and they're just basically running this on their own computer using their leftover resources. What VMware View lets us do is purchase a very expensive, very high-powered computer and run many virtual machines on it at once, but also let the students control those virtual machines over the internet. So essentially what I can do is I can buy one computer that's really well resourced for, say, $50,000 to $100,000 and have 30 students accessing the virtual machines on it at one given time. And to illustrate this concept, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to sign into the virtual lab at Central Michigan University. So CMIsh has created a virtual lab using this exact software. It was rebranded VMware Horizon a couple of years ago, but it's still actively called VMware View. And what I'm doing is I'm signing into a virtual machine that's being used on their system. So you can see it's very easy. All the student has to do is download a simple client, and there you go. I've got my Windows 7 desktop with all my Central Michigan University software. And you can see that I have some very expensive software here. I've got QuickBooks, I've got IBM SPSS, and again, this is actually just a virtual machine. So while it appears that I am physically controlling a computer somewhere at Central Michigan University, all I'm actually doing is accessing a virtual machine stored on a server. and it's very easy to use. It's not quite as fast as physically accessing a regular computer, but it's manageable. It's certainly doable. And when I'm done, the resources that I was using just go right back into the pool. So it's very, very efficient and very, very slick. So this is what we want the students to do. We want to create a lab environment on our own VMware View server that our students can use to access the lab. So what are the benefits? Well, for starters, we have anywhere, anytime access. I can access the VMware View virtual computers over any operating system. I can access them from my phone even. Anywhere, anytime that I'm connected to the internet. So I can do my labs from home basically. And there's also a common platform here. If I go back a few slides to this instance, again, this user is running this on their own computer. And if I apply this to my classroom, there are any number of issues that the students might have on their own computers that I don't really want to be exposed to, or I really don't have the time to be fixing. So they may have, an outdated version of Windows. They may not have the appropriate resources to run virtualized computing. They may not have enough RAM. If I put the virtual machine on the cloud and the student accesses it over the cloud, there's really none of those issues because everything is being managed by my one server. Okay? Negates the need for complicated lab schedules and a lot of time per class. Again, the resources are dynamic, so depending on how many people are logged into the virtual machines at one time, those resources are all shared. So you don't really need to have allotted times per class. Everything just gets shared evenly between all the users. And again, they can sign in any point at any time. And then finally, we have access to instruction issues. And this is a big one for schools that might not be able to afford the complicated, expensive Microsoft enterprise software, because that software, to license it, to give it to your students to be able to take home and practice with, is incredibly expensive. Whereas if I'm doing this on a virtual server, the cost is significantly less because the physical device never actually leaves my school. Right? So I don't need to extend licensing to every student. I'm just extending licensing to the number of virtual machines that I might possibly create. And because it's still staying on my premise, I'm not really distributing that. So that's a very important issue too. It can save a lot of money for schools. What are the disadvantages? Well, the first one is expense. Clearly, it takes a lot of time, effort, and money to get something like this set up. And again, you have to remember that the resources are shared. So theoretically, you need enough resources to run the virtual lab environment if 75% of your students try and log on at one time. If you have a class of 30 and each virtual machine needs 2 gigs of RAM, you're very quickly ranging your computer up into the 128 gigabyte of RAM mark, which is prohibitively expensive. And it requires extensive technical knowledge to set up and maintain. So this isn't something that you can do just basically on a server under your desk somewhere. It needs to be enterprise supported. You need to have a system administrator who really knows how this software and hardware works, working for you and maintaining that environment. And you need a lot of startup capital to get going, because the resources themselves are expensive. But if you can get through those disadvantages, it's really a very slick solution. So I want to take you through, we'll come back to Panopto in one quick second, but I want to take you through basically what the process is. And when we signed into the video or the server at Central Michigan, you saw a desktop that was pre-created for me. But that's actually really easy to do. All that was an administrator going through and creating what's called a template. In my circumstance, what I want the teacher to do is to create a template. And I know that sounds very scary, but it's actually really easy to do. All you do is you go in and create a virtual machine yourself using VMware Workstation, and it gets uploaded to the server. So to prepare the lesson, what we want the teacher to do is to prepare the virtual environment to set up that virtual machine that the students are actually going to be using. And then get that uploaded to the VMware View server. So when the student logs in, they get a customized virtual machine that their teacher has created. And this is a perfect opportunity to inject instructions, but you can also get the actual software needed all set up. When the student logs in, what they do is they connect through the cloud, they connect through their own internet connection, and they sign into the VMware View server just like I did on the demonstration, and they are given their own virtual machine that was pre-configured by their teacher. At this stage of the lab, what they're going to do is they're going to go through and they're going to complete their lab just like normal, as if they were sitting at a computer in the computer lab. And if the teacher prepares the template correctly, they should have everything they need right in that one virtual environment to be able to go through and do their lab. So they go through, they do their lab, and when they're done, they log off. Just log off the computer, and they wait for their teacher to mark it. And the teacher marking side is actually really easy too. What the teacher will do when they go to mark the assignment is they will sign into the VMware View server, and they will have access to all of the virtual machines that were created by their students. So every time a template gets opened by a student, it creates an individual virtual machine. And all the teacher has to do is go through these one by one, power them on, check the students to make sure that they have done their work, and then assign a grade. Okay? So it's a very seamless, non-contact procedure for both the teacher and the student using technology that they can basically access from anywhere. But a key point to the marking is that the teacher has to have the ability to see all these virtual machines. So if you have a very restrictive IT department that might not want to give you access to this VMware View server, that can be a problem to consider. But normally it's not, because you can get very granular in your access control with this product. In the second lesson, what we're doing is we're making accommodations for lab assignments where the teacher actually has to watch the student go through the steps. So it's not enough in this case to just achieve an end result. What we want to do is we want to be able to see the student actually go through the process. So the preparation is the same, but what we're going to have the student do is record their experiences using the Panopto software. And Panopto is a screencasting utility like we've all been using to create these videos, but it's a little bit more jazzed up. This is what it looks like when the student actually goes to record it. So you can see that it's got the primary screen here, and it's got a webcam and audio just like you would expect from your average sort of recording solution. But where it really has value add is on the back end when the user goes to view the session. In that it indexes everything that the student's doing. The student, when they're recording, they can assign milestones. They can say, this is the part where I'm going in and installing Active Directory, or this is the part where I'm installing the printer driver. And it also has the ability to add notes. So you can, on the back end, have the students create notes and reflect on their experience while they're watching a video of themselves going through the actual lab exercise. So it can be really useful for self-reflection, but it's also really useful as a recording tool too. So it's kind of the best of both worlds there. So what do I want the students to do in the second lab assignment? Well, I want them to fire up the Panopto application and then go through their lab, being mindful of the fact that it's going to record them actually going through their lab step by step by step. And when they're completed the lab, I want them to upload that video to a server so that I can view it, just like submitting it on Blackboard. But I also want them to go and use that notes feature that we just talked about to reflect on their experiences and to let me know what worked and what didn't work. So to provide a little bit of self-reflection in there. And that can be very detailed or very valuable to the student when they're going through a process like this, because as everyone who's actually worked in computers knows, they can be very frustrating. It can take, time to go through these lab assignments and figure out how it's going to come together in the end. And I want the students to reflect on what went right and what didn't go well in their assignment and to tell me about that in their notes. And the other side of that is, if I sort of understand from the students' notes what they're thinking, then I can at least give them part marks if things didn't quite go according to plan. So what I'm going to do, we'll go through the logic here of this process one more time. So the student fires up Panopto and records themselves completing the lab. So hits the record button and minimizes it. They go into the cloud, the VMware View server, and they access their virtual machine template, and they complete their lab. When they're done, they stop the Panopto recording and they upload it to the server, and at that point they would go in and annotate their experiences. As the teacher, when I go to market, what I want to do is I want to sign into the Panopto server again. I may also go back and look at their virtual machine, but the video should give me a pretty good indication of what happened during the session. And I'm going to go through and I'm going to watch the student video, watch the student complete the lab. This is great because I can catch every single detail because everything is recorded, and then I'm going to read the students' comments as they went through the lab. Finally, I'm going to assign a grade and give the student some more feedback. And again, calling your attention to the video, the fact that everything is indexed, I can call out to the student at a specific time in the video and say, hey, I saw you were having some trouble with this problem at 13 minutes and 42 seconds into your video. Yeah, that really gets a lot of people. Don't feel bad that it took you 20 minutes to figure out how to get around that. Good job. Or I can give them constructive feedback or any kind of feedback I want, really, highlighting the specific moment in their video where things went well or things didn't go well. So that's the end of my presentation. And to sum up, I think VMware View offers us a very unique opportunity to give the students a custom workspace in their own environment. And I think it's very powerful that you give a student a tool that they can access in an environment that they're comfortable with. But when we start to throw the software, the Panopto software, into the mix and record every detail that the student is doing and offer them the opportunity to reflect, this could really be a valuable resource to the classroom. Thank you for watching my presentation.